Welcome to Fireside with Voxgig, a podcast for professional and aspiring public speakers. I'm your host, Orla Shanahy of Voxgig, an online community for speakers and event professionals. We're here to help you get the most out of speaking, organising, exhibiting and attending. In each episode, I sit down for a relaxed fireside chat with people in the public speaking community. My aim is to learn how they've mastered the art of getting up on stage and speaking in front of an audience. If you're an aspiring speaker or just want to improve your onstage performance, this podcast will help you learn from some of the most accomplished and interesting professional conference speakers. And just before we begin, a quick shout out and thank you to our sponsor, simplecast.com, the first and last word in podcasts. Today I'm speaking with Matthew Revell, who's an expert in developer relations and he's the organiser of the DevRelCon series of conferences. He's an experienced speaker at events of all sizes, from small tech meetups to conferences with attendee numbers in the thousands. Matthew has made his career out of developer relations, facilitating communications and mutual understanding between developers and the people who want to work with them. Matthew, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, no worries. Thank you for having me.
So many public speakers say that they fell into public speaking as a major part of their careers. Was that the case for you?
I suppose so. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily consider myself much of a public speaker. It's something that I do from time to time. But for me, it's always been a means to an end. So I'm not someone who's gone out and, joined things like Toastmasters and that kind of thing. It's always been, for me, just that my job required it. And so, yeah, I did fall into it, I guess.
Okay. So can you tell us what was your first ever public speaking experience? And I mean first, like even if it was something in childhood or whatever, how did it all get started for you?
I remember doing an impression of Prince Charles in a school talent competition. Does that count? When I was about 7?
Yeah, I guess it does.
I didn't win. But,
Okay. And did that give you the bug for being on stage, for speaking in front of an audience?
No, I don't know. I mean, I was always more interested in radio, if anything. And so for me, I really liked the intimacy of feeling you had like a one-on-one conversation going on with the person who was listening. So that was always my passion in terms of communication type things.
Mm-hmm.
But I suppose that I became used to speaking on stage just because it kind of cropped up quite a lot in my life. And when I was a teenager, for some reason, I decided to run a poetry festival. And so that involved a lot of, being on stage, emceeing and so on.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it always just kind of cropped up. And then when I moved into tech, I think I did my first tech conference talk then some friends and I ran a tech conference, a Linux conference between 2004 and 2006, 7, I think it was. There's a lot of emceeing there and kind of just being on stage. And we were running a podcast at the time as well, which got a little bit of popularity. And but then I guess the first talk that I did being paid to speak at a tech conference was in Limerick in 2007 at the university. The Computer Society there ran an open source technology conference. And I was there talking about a product that I was working on at the time, which was kind of a forerunner to GitHub called Launchpad. And I was terrible, absolutely terrible. I was very nervous. I felt like I didn't know my material. I got conference kind of anxiety beforehand. And then during the talk, I lost my train of thought. And then during the questions, I couldn't answer the questions. So it wasn't great.
Oh, dear. Well, thanks for your honesty. It's always interesting. There's always a little bit of schadenfreude when we hear other people, making a mess of things on stage. Although I'm sure, do you find that even if things do go slightly wrong, that in many cases the audience doesn't notice or it doesn't bother them half as much as you think?
Yeah, I mean, I found that at least the events that I'm involved in, the audience is on your side and nobody goes, well, I say at least in the tech world that I'm most familiar with, nobody goes into the audience wishing that the speaker's going to mess up in some way. So I feel like it's normally a supportive environment. This is my experience as me, and I'm not saying that everyone has the same experience as me. So, I understand that this is just one person's view, but I found that people tend to be quite supportive. And if you do mess up, most people don't notice. And even if they do notice, I think people tend to go into a talk wanting to get something out of it. So they're wishing well for you.
Yeah, and that is a nice thing when you feel that support. coming from the audience. So from what you're saying, you, let's say, fell into speaking, for want of a better word, and it kept coming up. As you say, you kept getting asked or just finding yourself in situations where you were on stage. Did you ever get any training? How do you maintain your speaking skills?
I did a broadcasting studies degree at university, which meant that I got some BBC training, but not so much in public speaking. I think, I did hospital radio as a kid. And then I did some bits and pieces for local BBC radio. I was one of those kids who always had a tape recorder and a microphone. So I got used to the idea of speaking for other people who don't necessarily, in a context where it's not a conversation.
Yes.
And one of the things I think I've done is I've watched the videos of me talking, and certainly when I was doing radio and things like that, I'd listen back and I became very aware of certain tics and problems with the way that I was delivering talk, such as staying and look and that kind of thing too often, but also that I was quite rambly sometimes and would elide words together so that you wouldn't really understand what I was saying. So I've had to slow down. I've had to focus on pronunciation, but that's not so much a case of necessarily training. It's just I've gone back and been embarrassed by myself and then try to make sure that I'm not embarrassing next time.
Yeah. Okay, so you're largely self-taught, really. And as you say, you've gone back over recordings and tried to learn from previous experience. That's really great. You speak mainly to tech audiences, developer audiences, is that right?
Yes, I'd say so. Most of the people who attend the types of event that I speak at are from a developer background or certainly involved in the tech industry. I would say that these days I'm not speaking so much at developer conferences, but more at developer relations, API conferences, that sort of thing, because my specialism now is in helping companies to build developer audiences and developer communities. And so I tend to focus on that, which means that the people I speak to are actually a little more varied now. So there's marketing people, there's product people, sales people get involved in. It's becoming quite a hot topic in the tech industry. How do you sell to developers? How do you market to developers? How do you build an audience with them? So, yeah, I'd say that the people I end up speaking to has changed from purely developers to that more heterogeneous group.
And so I'm imagining that you maybe have to vary how you speak a little if you're speaking to more mixed audiences. I imagine there's quite a variety then in those kind of audiences, as you say. So do you alter what you're saying or modify it in some way when you're speaking to an audience that's not all technical people?
I think the content itself leads that. What I would say that is my experience of speaking to tech industry audiences, regardless of whether they're developers or not, is they're very focused on getting to practical takeaways that they can then adopt in their own work. I would say that one of the things of speaking to developer audiences is that, you need to show code, graphs, metrics, that kind of thing. You need to be able to say, I did this and it resulted in these things here, and it's how you can use it in your work life. Whereas with the slightly broader audience, I think there's still that need to be very practical, to have the takeaways and so on. But, you're not necessarily showing code and so on, but it's still very much about presenting a framework. Here are some repeatable things that we can extrapolate from experiences that I've had or people that I know have had, and that you can then put into your work life. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've come across this, but I found that sometimes at conferences, you find that people will effectively tell a war story. They'll say, here's what happened to us. And that can be interesting, but it's less useful if they don't then at least end that by trying to make what they experience into something repeatable that other people can use. And so I'd say the difference between the developer and the slightly more varied audience is really just that you're not speaking up about necessarily a particular technology, you're not backing up with code and so on, but instead, I'd say still you're looking to give them the same kind of takeaways that they can then put into their own work.
Your approach is very outcome focused, that people walk away with something they can use, something practical they can use in their work.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
At least that's how I see my job when I'm giving a talk, is that I'm doing the work to help those people make sense of what I think is useful to them.
Yeah. And I think that's probably very good advice for anyone who's starting out or relatively at the start of their speaking career, is to focus on the takeaways, and to let that guide the talk. So I wanted to ask you about your event.
Yeah.
Or one of them. DevRel is the main one. You've been running that for 4 years now, is that right?
Yeah, 2015 was the first one.
Okay. Yeah. And it currently takes place in 4 locations: London, San Francisco, Tokyo, and China. Where in China does it take place?
Well, we had Beijing and Shanghai. I think we're taking a year off this year.
Okay.
But I suspect 2020 will have Bangalore and possibly Nairobi as well.
Okay.
I don't know what's happening in China, I'll be honest, because the company who were helping us organise it there no longer exist. So,
okay.
Yeah.
The ups and downs of event management. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit, because Voxgig is a very much events-focused company. Mm-hmm. How did you first get the idea to start up an event? What was the motivation?
Well, I used to work for a startup that's no longer with us, and a colleague and I were looking to create the European edition of their developer event, which we'd done a lot of legwork. We found the venue, we had lots of ideas about what it should be like. And then the company didn't get the funding it needed, and the budget for that event was cut. So a year or two later, we decided to do it anyway, but ourselves. And so we did this distributed systems conference as a one-off. That was okay. It was a lot of work, learned a lot, decided not to do it again because really my passion wasn't there. What I realized was my passion was about developer relations. And I felt there wasn't at the time much being written or said about developer relations that it was really something that I could learn from as a practitioner. So I thought, well, I'll bring the experts to me and hopefully get some other people to come along as well. And It was in a co-working space above a supermarket in Shoreditch, so it was fairly low-key. Full budget for the, hour. I mean, it was me. I had a couple of friends helping out, but, the budget was no more than £10,000 for the day. But we had people come from America, from Japan, right across Europe. And there's only 100 or so of us there, but it was the start of something. And it seemed very clear that we were, as a community, we needed something to come together, DevRel practitioners. And then someone in San Francisco got in touch, who's now a friend, Tamao Nakahara, and said, hey, I saw this thing you did. Do you want to do it in San Francisco? So we collaborated on that. And then the guy who came from Japan went to that one as well. And then we had a conversation. I was like, hey, we should do it in Tokyo as well. He said, yeah, let's do that. So that happened. And then someone from China got in touch and said, hey, we'd like to run this in China. So I was like, yeah, okay, let's do that. And it's been fairly, I haven't gone out and sought to create a series of events, but it's grown organically.
Yes. One of the things I love talking to people who run events about is this entrepreneurial spirit that comes across. Like, in so many cases, there was a need here, we wanted this, so we just did it ourselves. It's fantastic. It dovetails so nicely with the whole tech startup world. So you're running 4 events this year, is that right? In widely distributed locations. I just wanted to ask you about the organizational side. How do you keep all that together? How do you organize that? Do you have much of a team? Or is it still mostly you?
I made a decision very early on that DevRelCon should be a community event. Because as someone working in a role that led to me sponsoring lots of events, I could recognize the events that people really cared about and that gave us a return on our sponsorship versus those that were run purely for the money. And, some events were nicer to deal with than others. So I tried to keep sponsorships low and ticket prices very low, to the point where I ended up making a loss on the events. Someone then said to me, this is silly. You need to actually put enough margin into this to turn it into something that's self-sustaining. I was like, yeah, okay, I think I've earned that now. So last year, for the first time in London, we had an events manager. And now there's enough budget in it that there's actually a team of us now who are running the events. The money from the events, any profit we make still goes straight back into it. In fact, we made probably a £20,000 loss on London last year, which was painful. But this year, I think we're going to make a little bit of margin, which means that we can put it back into making the event better and employing a team. So yeah, this year there's a team of there's one person working on it full time. There's myself, probably about a quarter of my time to half of my time goes on it. And then we have freelancers and so on who help us with design and so on. So there is certainly a team, but we try and keep things as, I don't want to say bare bones, but we want to reinvest as much as possible back into the experience of the event, while also being financially prudent enough to have a bit of margin left over that means that we get to do it again next year.
Yeah, it must be such a great feeling to be self-sustaining like that. That's fantastic. And in terms of tools then, software, How does the organizational side run from that respect?
That's been quite a journey, really. We use Tito on ticketing.
Mm-hmm.
I never know how to say it. That's been pretty good. I'm quite happy with that, and that continues to improve, so that's good. We use a lot of Asana and Google Docs on the project management and other side of things. Mm-hmm. We've got a couple of really big spreadsheets that do budgeting and things like that. Managing paper submissions is always painful. I've never found a good tool for that, I'll be honest.
Uh-huh.
So I think we're going to either build something around Airtable, spreadsheet system ourselves. I mean, we're using Typeform at the moment, which is great. And I'm big fans of Typeform as a company and the product, but it's not yet specifically for CFP. So things like it doesn't send an email out to people to confirm that they've submitted their talk, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Well, I believe that they're building a dedicated CFP tool soon. I've heard that anyway. So hopefully that'll be fixed for next time round. But really, that tool is fairly simple.
Okay, Matthew, we're coming to the end of our time. There is one thing I wanted to ask you before you go, and we touched on it a little bit already about the stress levels involved in running events, not to mention multiple events like you're doing. And one of our team here at Voxgig runs a conference called Mind Over Matter, which focuses on mental health in the design world. And the 2019 conference has just finished. So I wanted to ask you about the mental health side of things. When you've got so many plates spinning, as they say, it sounds like you're incredibly busy, as so many people in the events world are. How do you manage your own mental health? How do you encourage your team members to help manage overwhelm and feeling a bit snowed under? Do you have any advice, any tips on that?
Yeah.
How do you manage it yourself?
Well, I don't think I'm a good person to give advice on that. I mean, so in terms of the little team that we have here, I make sure that they work fewer hours than I do. I make sure that people take holiday, and also that we're trying to do something with our company where, family and personal life comes first, because I'm very much a work to live sort of person. And so I don't think I'm a particularly stressy boss. One of the people who works for me is sitting next to me, shaking his head and smiling. So I guess that's okay. Thanks, Charlie. So I think at the moment I'm putting, the well-being of the team ahead of my own. And right now I'm working roughly 70, 75-hour weeks. That's unsustainable. And that's not because of the events necessarily. That's because the consulting side of what we do, I guess, subsidizes the events to some extent, even though they are more or less self-sustaining now, I hope. I pay my own wage from the consulting side of the business, which means that, like consulting's feast or famine, right? We're lucky now in that after 3 years of running the consulting business, we are known, and so we have a good pipeline of work, but I'm still training myself that it's okay to say no to work sometimes.
Yes.
So sometimes it's possible to take a little bit too much, because I know that January is a quiet month, February is a quiet month, that it looks like they won't be for us, but I always operate on the idea that they're going to be quiet, but this time around it's going to be okay. Anyway, the thing is, so for mental health, I'm doing a bad job for myself because I'm working too long. I get very tired, and I know that's something I need to change. And I get quite stressed by remembering that there are a whole load of deadlines coming up, but I do have a good team working with me, and they support making things happen. So we've got this year running DevRel London is my colleague Carla Teixeira, and she's doing an amazing job of basically being the person who makes sure that things happen. And in a small business, particularly when you're the person who started it, I found that the biggest stress, whether it's running an event or whatever else it is that we're doing, the biggest stress is having to be the person who remembers that everything's got to be done. Using a decent project management tool does help, but having people on the team who step up and they're like, no, I'm going to make this happen, and then follow through. That's the biggest thing for the person. And for the broader team, I think it's just about remembering that life isn't about how many hours you put into work. It's about achieving things that you're proud of whilst also paying the bills and growing as a person.
Okay.
But mostly it's about all the stuff that you do outside of work.
It's such an uphill struggle all the time in terms of maintaining everybody's well-being and mental health. So even the level of awareness that you have of it, you're saying, okay, at the moment I work 70, 75 hours a week, but at least being able to say at the moment I'm not managing it that well, that's good, especially working in the tech world. A lot of people don't even have that level of awareness. So I think that's hopeful in your case.
Yeah, well, there's a big theme in submissions to our conference every time of burnout. And we have a talk this year by a guy called Andrew Simmons. His wife's an academic and he's a tech consultant. And between them, she's been doing academic research into the causes and solutions regarding burnout. And then he's brought this kind of tech industry spin on it.
Wow.
One of our keynotes this year will be called Managing the Burnout Burn Down, which is meant to be a practical kind of, here are the things you can do to avoid burnout. And I'm really looking forward to that talk.
Yeah.
Burnout is a problem in the tech industry. I think it's very much a problem in developer relations. And a lot of that is to do with mismatched expectations and not having mature frameworks for measuring effectiveness and so on. And that's one of the things we help with at Hoopy by the way. But yeah, burnout is certainly one of those issues that we see a lot of in our consultancy work. And then when we get together as an industry at DevRelCon, it's one of the common topics because it's sometimes hard to live up to the standards that we set for ourselves, let alone anyone else sets for us.
Yes. Well, it's great to hear that that's an actual explicit topic in your conference. That's really great. And it's through things like that we make progress. Matthew, we've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining me today. Maybe the next time we talk, we'll both have managed to work a little bit less. That would be quite nice. Best of luck with the next conference.
Yeah, thank you.
And talk to you soon.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. And I really enjoyed the talk and goodbye. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Fireside with Voxgig podcast. Just a few final notes before the embers fade. You can find show notes and links from this podcast at voxgig.com/podcasts. We also publish a weekly newsletter on public speaking, selecting the best advice and techniques from some of the world's greatest speakers, both ancient and modern. Rhetoric is an old and revered art, not especially easy to master, but it is a skill like any other and one you can learn. Visit voxgig.com/speakers to subscribe to the newsletter. If you've enjoyed this fireside chat, please consider subscribing to our podcast. Please also leave a review that helps us make this podcast even better. If you'd like to contact us directly, you can reach us on Twitter @Voxgig. And if you'd like to be counted as a supporter, just let us know and we'll add you to our supporters page. And one final reminder to check our sponsor, simplecast.com, who help make this podcast possible. Talk to you next time, and remember, take a deep breath, pause, and step forward.